Hello, and welcome to Vivaldi's special series of live streams, the Interaction Field series. Now, called that name for a good reason. It's because just a couple of days ago, there was a book launched called Interaction Field that was launched by the founder of Vivaldi, Erich Joachimstaler, and we're going to be talking to Erich in just a minute. But first of all, I just want to say thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of this. What we want is for you to get involved. It's not just to sit back and watch this, although you're welcome to do that if you want. You know, sit back, light a pipe, put your slippers on, or get involved. Ask questions. We want to hear your questions. I will be your advocate. I will be the person asking the questions on your behalf in the show. I'll be keeping an eye on them. So please get involved. But first of all, let's meet the man himself, Erich Joachimstaler. Erich,
Hello.
hello to you.
How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Erich. Very well. So you have just launched a book while the world is still in pandemic mode. You've launched books in the past. How different is this book launch to your previous book launches in this strange world that we're in?
It's very different. You know, we usually celebrate in person, which cannot ever be replaced by this way of launching a book. So it's a totally new sort of environment for me, at least. And so but there's one part that is sort of like really great about this, and it's because of the situation we live in, the pandemic. There's also, it's an opportunity to reaching out to some very dear friends, very amazing thought leaders that sort of like help to think about how this book sort of fits into a larger context. And I think that privilege we wouldn't have if we are 50 or 100 people in a room here in somewhere in New York City. So it's a really good perspective, and I think that everybody sort of reaches out a bit and sort of like and accepts an invitation. Today is one great example of that.
Yeah, we've got a fantastic guest, and somebody that you've known for many
Yes.
years. So let's introduce our guest, Professor David Collis. Now, he is absolutely top class, as you will hear. He's an expert on corporate strategy and global competition. He's been a professor at Harvard Business School for the last 30 years. He knows his onions. He's the winner of the 50th anniversary McKinsey Award for the best article in the Harvard Business Review. He's a best-selling author of a number of books, including International Strategy, and he's recognized as one of the top 100 most influential textbook authors by the Academy of Management Learning and Education in 2018. He's a splendid chap. So, hello, David. Let me swap places with you. You deserve to be at the top. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you.
Fantastic. Erich, I'm sure you want to get started right away with some questions.
So now you gave so much credentialing David, and I know David, so I know that it is indeed true that these accomplishments and the years at the Harvard Business School. But here's the thing for this particular conversation. There is the idea out there right now that in this world we live in, the pandemic world, the world that we have, the fourth industrial revolution, some call it, that the fundamentals of strategies actually have changed. And what was, there's this old view and the new view and of competitive advantage. And I may say David here on the call is known for that old view. Or should we call it old in one? And the idea being, so there used to be two ways of getting a competitive advantage. But Warren Buffett calls it a moat. You know, the moat that you to protect your business and you create sustainable profitability in a business. And there are two ways of doing this. One is it's how you differentiate your product, and this is where brand come in. This is the market-based view, the competitive positioning point of view, the Michael Porterian point of view. And the second way you can protect is you build these assets and capabilities, which is called the resource-based view of the firm, so that you have this advantage that like it's like a moat that helps you to stay in business, make lots of money, become profitable, and so forth. And so I read this article last year by a professor at LBS, Julian Bergenshow. He says, the new rules of competition make these two older versions, the market-based view, if you will, irrelevant or less relevant. So I am incredibly curious now to hear from from David about is strategy irrelevant? Is competitive advantage? Is there a massive shift of how we create value? Or over to you, Dave.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question, and the answer is sort of yes and no. The no part is there is still enormous value in understanding the basic ideas of what you're referring to as old, what I would refer to as sort of classic strategy as competitive positioning. There's nothing wrong with that. That is still appropriate, necessary, adds value to companies. The problem is, and this is my take on it, that strategy is basically about three things. One is about value creation. The second is about value capture. And then the third is about value realization. And the problem we have in the strategy field is we've done such a good job of understanding value capture, that middle part. That's where all the action, that's where all the ideas of strategy, Mike Porter's 5 forces industry structure analysis, the things you were talking about, Erich, building moats and competitive differentiation, all of that's about value capture. One of the best books is by A.G. Lafley and Roger Martin called Playing to Win. And a lot of companies sort of have that. And the basic idea is, what game are we playing and how do we win?
Yeah.
Now, that presumes we understand the game we're playing. It is football, but what happens if the game we're playing is Quidditch? That's the problem, that we focus very much on, mature, established industries where there's clear competitors. We can understand what differentiation looks like. We focus very much on value capture. And the problem is that in the last 20 years, that is not really where the action has been. So go back to the other end, the value creation, the value potential. If you think about the companies that are the most valuable companies in the world today, Facebook, Amazon, Google or Alphabet.
Yep.
Yeah, they were not existing 30 years ago. The businesses they're in simply didn't exist 30 years ago. And the fact that we refer to them these days as sort of platform businesses, platforms referred to railway stations 25 years ago, that it's a completely new business model. Mm-hmm. And at that end, then, strategy has not been that helpful in understanding how you create value with new business models, the value potential of new business models. And therefore, it's completely missed out on all this action, the entrepreneurial, the unicorns. I don't know of any large company that created one of these new business models. At the other end, the value realization end, strategy is very much around, again, classic historic strategy around, here's a clean sheet of paper, here's the description of this beautifully aligned set of activities, there it is, now go and execute against it. And execution or implementation, if anything, was about change management that implies a sort of one-time shift to a new strategy. That is not how things work in the real world. The practice of strategy in most companies is there is an existent strategy. It might be purely poorly articulated and communicated, but most companies have a strategy. The practice of strategy, the way you experience it as a manager, is there is some shift in the external environment, or what I call the opportunity set. And you then have to adapt what goes on inside your company to take advantage of that. You don't change the strategy, but you change important aspects of the activities of the firm. So the classic one for me here would be like Burger King adopting mobile ordering technology. Burger King is not going to change its strategy. They're not going to go away from low-cost hamburgers targeted at high-volume consuming males, age 18, whatever it is. But the decision to add in mobile ordering has strategic implication. We have to think about changing the process of ordering. The flow in the restaurant might be different. We might change the menu items. In fact, we might even change the location of the restaurants to be able to accommodate the shift in consumption patterns. That's the practice or the realization of strategy, and that requires continuous adaptation. And again, strategy classically didn't talk about that. It talked about, like you said, building the moat.
Yes.
So to me, at both ends, nothing wrong with strategy. It helps us understand value capture. It has not been helpful, although there are ideas out there around value creation, value potential, nor at the other end around value realization, continuous adaptation and implementation.
I think that there's an echo. There are two significant things that you say. Number one is the dichotomy is there is the continuum or dichotomy of there is a pipeline business, a value chain business, the traditional differentiation or low cost sort of strategy on one side, pushing out products and services, and then there is an alternative to that, the platform type business. It's actually a false dichotomy. It's actually, that's sort of like a real significant point of view, because I think it is both need to live in this world. And the second thing that gets me on this idea of Burger King. If you think one mistake we make is we look at Burger King and say, oh yeah, now they do mobile ordering. Well, we are in the pandemic, and we are looking at a change of, let's say we call it omni-channel experience. We create an omni-channel experience. You can go to the store, you can a restaurant, or you can buy it mobile, or you drive by and go through the window, whatever. So all of these possibilities, omni-channel. So we are looking at a slight change of omni-channel, and we don't see that this is really a much larger change for the organization. It's actually what I call building an interaction field, because there is something fundamentally that is changing, that Burger King does not have a direct relationship with customers, and suddenly there is a direct interaction with customers. When you order by mobile, they keep that record. When they know when you pick it up, they know where you come from, and so there is the relationship is not I've seen this person on a counter and he used a coupon. The relationship becomes almost a continuous interaction rather than a transaction. So So I think it's a fundamentally change. One of the people said it's almost like an inflection point, even though it might be so small. The Burger King example, it's an inflection point because it changes the assumptions of the business of Burger King.
Right. So yeah, let me pick up on that. Yeah. And you're exactly right. If I go back to the sort of new business models, an even more extreme example, or biggest is Disney. Disney has spent net $50-60 billion to acquire Fox and launch its 3 DTC video streaming channel. Now, why did they do that? Part of it was scale in making movies, but the real reason was Disney classically had less than 25% of its revenue where it actually knew who the end consumer was. That if you think about, they sell a toy, it goes through Hasbro or a toy store. When you're watching the Disney Channel, that's through a cable company. Disney doesn't know your address or anything. Yeah. And what they wanted to do was establish a direct relationship with the customer. Why? So like you said, they can use that data in creative ways. When you stay in the hotel at Disney World, they don't know that you bought Elsa, you've watched Frozen 50 times. That if they had that information, they would, when you checked into your hotel room, they'd have it set up as Frozen and Elsa for you. They invested billions of dollars in the Magic Band, so they track you through the theme parks. Now they want to have that interaction, as you say, with the customer, where they have access to all the customer information, so they can improve the quality, the offering of the product or service they provide. So there's there's a classic, huge example of a company shifting its business model, moving into the DTC work explicitly to establish those relationships with customers.
But in a way, what you say is, and that's sort of interesting, is that they are basically doing exactly what you just said. Disney, as an example, they go left to value creation. Mm-hmm. They say, look, we have a strength in value capture. That's been our business. We've been doing very well with that, starting with Roy Disney at the beginning, in the early days with animation. And that's sort of like that's our business. But now we're creating value through, we need to go have a direct relationship with consumers. That enables us to capture also, to do value creation, like many of the startups can do, and other companies, and on part of the realization. So it's there's a shift in strategy. It's not that strategy is dead. It's actually almost like exponential. It's almost like augmented. It's almost like putting in hyperdrive, rather
right.
than sort of.
And I know one of the things you say in your is, classically, and you alluded to it, that we think about strategy and moats around sort of the supply side.
Yeah.
We own Disney World. We have all the assets to build, the rides and all the rest of it. That's our moat. That's impossible for anyone else to recreate. It's supply side scale economies or experience curve or net. And what you're saying, and the Disney example of let's now have a DTC where we really understand and have a relationship with the customer is, we can increase for sure the value we create for customers because we have that information. But it also becomes that information, that relationship becomes then the demand side network effect and the demand side moat that you're creating for yourself.
Yeah, and in some ways it's the network effects, viral effects, and I may say, this is where I come in my career, Dave. In a way, the consumer used to be always consumers. Let's say in the Disney example, sort of like that other thing, that annoying other thing, if you will, that we sort of like ship products to, and maybe goes to our theme parks. But now with value creation on the demand side, the consumer becomes an active participant in value creation. It's no longer, I think it's a very different shift of strategy.
Yeah, you're right. That instead of viewing what you produce as a product, you ship it out, you give it to the customer, it has discrete features and attributes, and that's what the customer wants. You're now involving the customer in it, and there's a continuous interaction between you and the customer, and they become part of the broader ecosystem. So just an example, I'm familiar with Komatsu, the bulldozer, the construction equipment company. Classically, you built the bulldozer and it had these various could push this amount of earth, this power, and people bought it. What they're moving to now is what's called smart construction, where, yes, they've automated and they're getting close to autonomous bulldozers, but way more than that. They're no longer trying to sell the bulldozer. They're integrating the construction site. So they have a platform where all the participants in the construction site, whether it's the architect, whether it's the dump truck operators, whether it's the site surveyors, they're all on the same platform. They're all sharing data and information. And the efficiencies you get by having everyone involved in that are just orders of magnitude. That you online now, you can plan much more carefully. They can in fact triple the capacity of the bulldozer because they can integrate it much more clearly into the actual activities on the webs. All of that now is building this ecosystem of people who were previously customers are now part of their platform, providing information, sharing information that creates this huge amount of value in a very different business model for Komatsu than just selling a bulldozer.
Wow. I could tell you the same story from my book, and in my first chapters, I have John Deere in there, and it's the same thing in the agricultural field. And what's sort of interesting to me is again, by almost like to your model, that the model that I see is value creation, value capture, value realization. And so if you are strong on value capture, like a Komatsu, like a John Deere, you're moving in a way toward value creation by building this platform and digital ecosystem, let's say. But by doing that, that really also means that you're fundamentally changing value realization and the opportunities that you create there.
Yeah, and you started off by saying the sort of the Julian Birkinshaw, Rita McGrath, or the end of competitive advantage, and that's sort of what's happening to some. That value capture gets you so far, but at the end of the day, if you're Ford, eking out a 0.3% gain in market share this year, is not exactly the way to make lots of money. In contrast to a Tesla, an electric vehicle, a completely different business model. As you say, they've eliminated the dealer networks. They have a direct relationship with the customer. That's where the action is in terms of, from a shareholder perspective and shareholder value. That's really where all the money has been made.
Yeah.
And again, nothing wrong. We still have to understand and position ourselves and think about industry structure, but the real payoff is in finding new business models, new ways of doing things, and designing an organization capable of continuously adapting to the changing world. And I think, rather than just, that's it. Here's the car, here's the bulldozer. Yeah. Now let's live off that for the next 10 years.
And I would, may I suggest, Professor, may I suggest then your point of view is limiting. Because you still look at it from how it changes the company, how it's so like how when you move in this new direction, like Komatsu, how you participate or become a value creator and you change realization. But there is this larger question. At least I try to look in my book, because what you mentioned, Tesla, Komatsu, John Deere, in my example, they are also changing. They are also addressing not just new problems for those people who want to build farmers or want to build a building, let's say. They are solving massive industry problems which we never solved before. We always had a problem in the car industries with the way dealers treat you when you buy a car, for example. So Tesla says, I have direct relationship with consumers. I create my own stores. No more haggling, no more price haggling things. So it solves for industry problems that we have in the inefficiencies in agricultural fields, let's say, and it also solves for societal problems. Tesla being, weaning off us of fossil fuel. I really like your perspective, but it's actually a bigger change. Shared value.
So I'm referring to this as sort of the complete strategy landscape. And you're right. The problem is we've sort of been looking very narrowly. And again, nothing wrong. We have to know it. But we really need to expand and zoom out now and consider, a much broader set of, new business models, ways of strategic management, of execution, thinking more broadly about platforms and ecosystems and interactions with customers, which are ways at the end of the day to increase the size of the pie. Again, strategy was very much about the share of the pie, which assumes there's a given pie and a traditional way of doing it. What I think we're both saying is, no, we need to look about how do we increase the size? What other ways are there, technology enabled and so on, that allow us to create so much more value, which is good both for us and for society, obviously.
And what I like about this now is look, there's been this discussion about maximizing shareholder value versus stakeholder value. And the first view is like, look, you can talk about that, the business roundtable, 180 plus executives or CEOs signing this statement. Yes, from now on, shareholder value is not that important. Stakeholder value, everybody should value creation, everybody should be considered. That's kind of an interesting idea, but when you look at it, you say, like, how is this ever going to happen? Because shareholders are investors; they need to be served. If you're a CEO, you need to, and you want to be in the job, you maximize shareholder value. So this discussion of a larger stakeholder value sort of breaks down, because where would it come from? If you share out more value, if you have more value creation with stakeholders, there is less for shareholders, and that can't ever happen. But I think you have the answer here, because what the answer is that it increases the pie. basically.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
If you think like that, it increases the pie and everybody benefits. I think that is sort of the answer to that controversy, in my opinion, or that discussion, shareholder value versus stakeholder value. That's the answer.
No, it is. It is about that the rather than worrying about your share of the pie, increase the size of the pie. And a company I worked with for a long time, Edward Jones, the brokerage here, incredibly successful for the last 30 years.
Based on a strategy too, like very much, even to the day. So it's still a very valid business model.
No, it's a valid strategy. The choice of who they serve, which is the customer that at some sense knows that saving is important, but knows they don't know enough about. They want to delegate it to someone else, and they want a close personal relationship through the office and the advisor to do that. The problem that they've had is nothing wrong with the strategy. The problem is that with fintechs, that with shift in regulation, with people moving to passive, in the classic job to be done, what they were doing for the value they were creating for was basically about portfolio management. We tell you what to invest in, we do it. That was it. Nothing wrong with it, but the value available from that is being squeezed, the value captured from. So what they've had to do is say, no, we've got to create more value for the customer. And so now they're pushing, what they're saying is, we're not just doing portfolio, we're going to solve your financial problem. You've expanded the potential value you can create for them, because even if you're winning in that part of the value is being squeezed and squeezed. And so it's about, let's think more, how can we shift business models? How can we shift the job to be done for the customer to create so much more value that everyone benefits,
that was my thing on the book. I called it an interaction field. You need to, instead of looking at, and I think that you've done it so well in this conversation, instead of looking at your, value capture way of creating competitive advantage, by expanding it, you actually create what I call an interaction field. That is that value creating mechanism. So wonderful, really wonderful discussion. I think Dave linked in there because he has some questions.
Yes, we've got some questions from the audience. So one of the things so first of all, if you're watching this and you've got some questions, please put your questions in the comments. Now's the time to do that. We've got a question here from Catherine, who says, are there any unexpected downsides in value creation within the open digital ecosystem? And how might we anticipate or prepare for those challenges? David, I'll let you address this one first.
An obvious one, and the Disney example I think raises it, is to the extent to which the interaction and the expansion of that is the relationship with the customer. That gets into all these issues around data privacy. So to what extent do you actually want Disney knowing that you bought the Elsa doll that you've watched Frozen 50 times? That's just one question. Do you even want them to know that about you? And then obviously the follow on to that is, are you comfortable with them using that? Do you actually want to have Elsa in the room when you get there to Disney? And that's even before you get to I think where it's perhaps easier to draw a line with reselling that data to someone else. Or again, one of the issues here is as you bring more people into the ecosystem, I have this slice of data. Yes, if I shared it with this person or that person, we could come up with an even better offering. But it's the privacy and the data rights of, should I, even if it potentially offers you a better product, give the data to this person or that person? So I think the one of the real constraints, or one of the real issues that companies are wrestling with, is in the digital world, as we bring everyone in and as we think sharing information and data improves the value we can offer, where are the limits on data privacy, data control?
Yeah, I think that. And I think that's
Erich, as a German, as a German, we sort of know that Germany has got some of the tightest data policies of all countries, and they've been really pushing this. And the whole thing about data in Europe has come from Germany. But as we know that there are different ways that countries around the world deal with data, does that then start to affect the way that we need to build our strategies on an international level?
Yes, obviously there are the European Union leads, and Germany is a big dominant player in the European Union and leads on these issues. But I actually think that there is a regulatory body, I think, needs to evolve, and there's huge discussions right now. But what really happens in these models is that consumers decide to share data. Like think of one example I write in the book, which is Flatiron Health. Flatiron Health aggregates data from cancer patients. But everything that they are treated with, what drugs they are using, what kind of tests are being performed on a things, and they do it for 2.5 million cancer patients. Now you ask yourself, why would you disclose your very sensitive cancer information, your health condition information, and how does it affect your premium and all these things? But 2.5 million cancer patients do that. Why do they do that? Because the value creation, let's talk about that, is actually huge, including for those who have been diagnosed with cancer. 18 million people in America are diagnosed with cancer. The average survival rate is 18 months in some of the conditions. And when you ask, these patients actually share the data with Flatiron, and there's a reason why, because it helps to get better treatments. Pfizer learns, it's shared with other competitors, Pfizer, Roche, and other competitor companies. Sometimes they have found out, based on this data, that you may actually need a therapy, a drug therapy, and maybe you can actually just live with your cancer condition by eating better, for example. And most importantly, the FDA, the Drug Administration, has now released some of the drugs earlier so that they help some to save some people's lives who would have not in time a drug for their condition approved. So there is a lot of benefits for everybody in sharing data, even healthcare. So yes, privacy issues, but I think that consumers are also smart, and they say, look, there is a benefit that I also gain from that, or everybody else gains from that. And so this is what we call first-party data, where consumers actually say, I give you my data, I approve of that. It's very different from a regulation of, let's say, third-party data, which is a Facebook example, which uses the data from to do other kinds of businesses. So I think
the data issue is not just around the consumer and privacy, it's also around competitors. So again, back to the Komatsu example, they know there's a lot of Caterpillar bulldozers being used on building sites. So what they've done is the platform is actually agnostic, and they've got partners involved, so they're not the owner of the platform, because they want people with Caterpillar equipment to be able to benefit from it. So it's you also have to think about who owns the data and how much are your competitors. You want to bring competitors in, not just customers here. The ecosystem, and who gets what data, who owns what. So data issues, not just, again, consumer privacy, but competitor, become really critical when we think about broadening the scope beyond into an ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, what's fantastic about that is you have not only consumers, or in this case construction firms, sharing the data, or farmers sharing the data, and sort of participating in that. Competitors sort of start sharing data. Yeah. I think that there is a real goodness that is coming from that, and there is, of course, also the downsides. Another downside, for example, are lots of, I think that in economics you call them negative externalities. What do car dealers do when there are more electric cars? And car dealers make money most on service and repair. And electric cars have significant less needs for new parts. There are fewer parts in that kind of a car versus in a combustion engine car. So there is an evolution that is natural, that almost a Darwinistic evolution that needs to take place, that harms a lot of businesses. That's why it's so important to listen to this podcast.
Yeah. So if I can know, just go back to the complete strategy land. We're talking a lot about electric vehicles, and we know Tesla is like this, unbelievably valued company. Putting in a pitch for classic strategy and knowing strategy now has to involve the complete landscape I think what's happened with Tesla and electric vehicles is people have got carried away with the value creation potential of electric vehicles. A completely different business model. Has lots of appeal and attractions. And a lot of electric vehicles are going to become probably the dominant form of car transport. That's the appeal. That's why it looks like Tesla is so valuable. But let's do the other pieces of the landscape. The first one is value capture. Is an electric vehicle industry in 20 years' time going to be attractive? And the answer is it's going to look very much like the current auto industry. Everyone will be in there, GM, VW, there'll be a slew of competitors. Will Tesla have a competitive advantage in a classic sense? Well, at the moment, they might have a brand advantage, but probably in 5 years, Tesla will be passé. And so it looks less likely that, in fact, however much value is created, that Tesla is going to end up capturing a huge chunk of that value. And then last part, value realization. Well, to their credit, they opened a factory in Shanghai in about a year. But really, they've had real struggles just basically making the cars to a quality level. And so, yes, you look at the value potential, the value creation of electric vehicles, huge. They're going to take over the world. But when you look at is any car company, and in particular is Tesla, going to capture much of that value? Question. And then will Tesla actually be able to continue to realize the value and adapt and produce? Question there would say to me, and again, you can hold me accountable for this, in 3 years' time, is Tesla going to be worth anywhere close to its current value? I would say no. But you get that by looking at the complete landscape of value creation, value capture, and value. You have to look at all of them to be able to come up with a judgment, and it is a judgment, about the potential value of a Tesla here.
Well, and if I were to look at it from my book, I would have to look and say, if I were Tesla today, I would say, how is those three areas, value creation, value capture, and value realization, how is that evolving? Well, how is that interaction field among players changing? And what must I do now to design a business model, if you will, the interaction field, in a way so that I benefit from the realization, from those three buckets, if you will, your three buckets, Dave, over the next years to come, because clearly value is I agree with that in 3 years from now, the third bucket, value realization, is a much bigger opportunity for, and the large car companies with much more unit volume probably have that advantage there.
Yeah.
So let's see if I can get one more question in before we wrap this up. It's amazing. Time has just flown. And so we've got a fantastic question here from... I was going to give one question from Jonathan Knowles. He's just given another question here. Question for David. Can you please clarify the difference between value capture and value realization? Okay,
yeah, sure. So value capture is... well, let me talk about all three. Value potential, value create is the absolute maximum. So that if we think about electric vehicles, the value potential, the value is, how much is it worth to consume, to be able to have electric vehicles, and that's a huge number, Value capture then is, okay, what will the structure of the industry look like? Is this going to end up being a profitable industry, like in the old days pharmaceuticals was, or is this going to be an unprofitable industry like health clubs has always been? So even if there's an enormous pie here, if there's incredible competition, the value capture, the share that the income of the providers of the product or service get is small. And then the subset of that is, do you have a competitive advantage? How much of that industry value are you potentially or holding on? And then realization is, okay, in principle, you have a good can you actually over time sustain that? Can you adapt as the world changes, the opportunity set? Can you add on mobile technology so that you continue to have that competitive advantage and capture that value. So at some level, we can think about this as a sort of funnel. There's the value creation potential. There's how much of that goes to the industry. What's your competitive advantage? And then can you sustain that and realize that over time? And that's obviously the bit you're trying to end up with. So I hope that's helpful for you, Jonathan, in terms of understanding the difference here. And I think that notion of a funnel is probably the best way to think about it.
That's great. So it's time for us to start bringing this to a close. And I was wondering if I could ask David, if you've got any practical tips for companies that might be wanting to get started with the thinking about complete strategy landscape, as you talk about here. That they may have had a strategy that's been focused on value capture, but are thinking, well, hold on, value creation, value realization, either side of it are things that maybe we should think about. What would be your main tip for those companies to get started with that kind of thinking? And I know that I'm trying to get to say a heck of a lot in like 2 minutes.
But you asked for one. Can I give you two, one at each end? So the value creation. Vivaldi and Erich and I used to do this thing in Internet 1.0 called destroyyourself.com. And, pretty straightforward, incumbent firms. If you were doing an internet-based startup that was to attack your business, what would it look like? Forget who you are. And that I think is what I suggest at the value creation end, is a sort of what is a completely different new business model. Forget who you are, forget the assets you have, read books like The Interaction Field to think differently about what the world can be like, what a business model can be like. And, literally it's the... again, I have much more detail about what a business model is and monetization method and all the rest. So there's a lot more substance there. But the gist of the end around value creation is a little bit more opening up, thinking much more creatively about how you can provide a job to be done that's valuable to the customer in a different way, a different business model. And at the other end, the value realization one, I think there it's as much about designing an administrative context, like the organization, that allows the firm, the company, even with an established strategy, to be able to experiment, to look entrepreneurial, to do lean startups, to do A/B testing, to incorporate all of that in the daily way of going about business, because that's the only way you're going to adapt effectively to a rapidly changing world. So building inside the company an ability to be entrepreneurial, experimental, I'd called it lean startup at one stage. I think those are each end would be the two recommendations.
Fantastic. That's very, very helpful. Thanks, David. Now, we've had so much activity in the comments. I'm really disappointed that I couldn't just keep this going because there's so much that people want to talk about here. So if you've given a question in the comment, we haven't got to it, I'm really sorry, but thank you so much. Your input is brilliant. And I also want to thank David and Erich for being on the show, especially David. I think that you're being able to explain this is really helpful. I think you've done it very concisely with these 3 steps. I think it's a beautifully simple model to be able to get. It's the realization might be the bit that people start to. So it takes a little bit more work, but that's a beautiful model. So thank you very much for your time, and we have got another of these shows tomorrow. So thank you for watching. Thank you, David, for being on the show. Thank you, Erich, as ever, for your wonderful brain. And we shall see you, lovely viewers, back here tomorrow with our next show. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.